Good morning. Dr. Maya Angelou with a tribute.
His day is done, is done. The news came on the wings of a wind reluctant to carry its burden. Nelson Mandela's day is done. The news expected and still unwelcome reached us in the United States, and suddenly our world became somber. Our skies were leadened. His day is done. We see you, South African people, standing speechless at the slamming of that final door through which no traveler returns. Our spirits reach out to you, Bantu, Zulu, Xhosa, Boer. We think of you and your son of Africa, your father, your one more wonder of the world. We send our souls to you as you reflect upon your David, armed with a mere stone, facing down the mighty Goliath. Your man of strength, Gideon, emerging triumphant, although born into the brutal embrace of apartheid, scarred by the savage atmosphere of racism, unjustly imprisoned in the bloody maws of South African dungeons. Would the man survive? Could the man survive? His answer strengthened men and women around the world. In the Alamo in San Antonio, Texas, on the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, in Chicago's Loop, in New Orleans' Mardi Gras, in New York City's Times Square. We watched as the hope of Africa sprang through the prison's doors, his stupendous heart intact, his gargantuan will hale and hearty. He had not been crippled by brutes, nor was his passion for the rights of human beings diminished by 27 years of imprisonment. Even here in America, we felt the cool, refreshing breeze of freedom when Nelson Mandela took the seat of presidency in his country, where formerly he was not even allowed to vote. We were enlarged by tears of pride as we saw Nelson Mandela's former prison guards invited courteously by him to watch from the front rows his inauguration. We saw him accept the World's Award in Norway with the grace and gratitude of the Solon in ancient Roman courts and the confidence of African chiefs from ancient royal stools. No sun outlasts its sunset, but will rise again and bring the dawn. Yes, Mandela's day is done, yet we, his inheritors, will open the gates wider for reconciliation, and we will respond generously to the cries of blacks and whites, Asian, Hispanics, the poor who live piteously on the floor of our planet. He has offered us understanding. We will not withhold forgiveness, even from those who do not ask. Nelson Mandela's day is done. We confess it in tearful voices, yet we lift our own to say thank you. Thank you, our Gideon. Thank you, our David, our great courageous man. We will not forget you. We will not dishonor you. We will remember and be glad that you lived among us, that you taught us, and that you loved us all.
It's a beautiful tribute, and it's available online for anybody to see. On our own website and from our headquarters in Denver, the spiritual leader of our nationwide community of Centers for Spiritual Living, Dr. Ken Gordon, wrote these words: As the world mourns the death of Nelson Mandela, may we take a moment to be grateful for this man who showed all of us what can happen when you live from divine qualities of love, peace, and forgiveness. Coming from the darkness of the injustices of apartheid, his light opened our hearts and minds to understand that we are always at choice. He chose love over hate, forgiveness over bitterness, mutual understanding over conflict. When Mr. Mandela became South Africa's first black president in 1994, he said, "The time has come for the healing of the wounds. The moment is here to bridge the chasm that divide us. It has come. May we as members of Centers for Spiritual Living," Dr. Ken wrote, "honor this man by continuing to help heal the wounds and bridge the chasm that remains in our world." For Centers for Spiritual Living is dedicated to creating a world that works for everyone. So today, I bow my head in thanks for the man who showed us how this can be achieved, and by doing so, changed not only his country, but our global consciousness. One of the ways that we can honor our ancestors and the great people of our time is by letting the values that they stand for spring into life in our own lives, and to teach those values to our children and live by them as best as we can. It's an important part of our teaching at the Center for Spiritual Living, that we embody those qualities we wish to see come into being in the world by dwelling upon them to such a degree that we actually become them, so that we can say, "I am forgiveness, I am reconciliation, I am peace." The international editor Lindsay Hilsum said that Nelson Mandela achieved the status of secular saint. And the reason why, I think, is to be found in the words of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who said, "I have no doubt that he will be remembered as an icon of reconciliation and forgiveness, a person of a very considerable status, who was able to preside over a process of transformation from oppression to democracy, while avoiding the bloodbath everyone was expecting would happen." And the international community was indeed expecting a bloodbath to happen. Everybody thought it would be disastrous in South Africa. When I was in South Africa last with a group of 50 travelers from the Center for Spiritual Living, I asked one of the locals there what, in his opinion, he thought was the reason why Nelson Mandela could do what no other person seemed to be able to do. And the person explained to me something that I was already aware of, but it was good to hear articulated again. He explained how South Africa was a fractured country, not only because it was in the strong grips of white supremacy. In addition to that, all of the people of South Africa were fractured among their various groups. The whites were fractured, the English-speaking from the Afrikaans-speaking, and so on. The blacks were fractured between the various different groups. You heard Zulu, Xhosa, Sotho. It was fracturedness everywhere. But Nelson Mandela's incarceration for so long became a symbol of human injustice for everyone, so that people of every color and race and religion could accept his leadership and call him the father of their nation. And when he came out of prison, he who had every right to not forgive and to be angry and to be filled with revenge, when he spoke for reconciliation and forgiveness and equality, his voice was perhaps the only voice on the planet at that time that could be heard and followed. The journalist John Davidson first reported from South Africa for the Wall Street Journal in the 80s, and he covered Mandela after his release and also through his election and inauguration. And he wrote this: The magnitude of the international tributes to Mandela indicates the incomparable impact he had, not just on South Africa, but on all of us. He was more than just the first black president of his nation. He led his country as it eradicated an entrenched system of white superiority, brutal racism, and black oppression, and then created a new South Africa based on strong notions of reconciliation and equality that are protected by one of the world's most progressive constitutions. For many people in South Africa, the pain and hurt of apartheid had never been told. It was never able to be told because the white government had disallowed it so completely that it was impossible to give expression to it. And some of you may remember that after Mandela's release, his government put in place the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. It was a kind of new experiment, a new social experiment in forgiveness and healing, because during the years of apartheid, torture, violence, atrocities, crimes against humanity were commonplace. One of the theories behind the commission was that being able to testify in an open and safe environment may be able to help people to ease the pain and to promote the possibility of forgiveness, both among those people who were given the opportunity to speak, as well as among those people who were hearing it and identifying because their stories were very similar, but still too painful to announce. It's very difficult to describe the results of such a commission using the words success or failure because it was very complex and because sometimes healing is messy and painful. The journalist continues to write, "Now this moral force is gone. Died Thursday at age 95. His memory, his legacy, and what he taught us will last. But the pain is still fresh. The hole feels deep. There is so much to appreciate about Madiba, as South Africans affectionately call him. Mandela was a man of unwavering principle. Though that did not prevent him from being also pragmatic, he refused to accept release from prison until after other political prisoners were freed and the African National Congress, his political organization, was unbanned. That's why he spent so long in jail. Found guilty of sabotage against the apartheid regime, he was sentenced to life at a trial in 1964. He stood on principle, and his words at that trial became a defining moment in the Mandela mystique. One of the defining moments of my young life at age 19 in South Africa was when I watched a black man being beaten up brutally by policemen for the mistake of having the wrong color skin and getting onto the wrong train. Defining, why? Well, because I didn't stand unwavering on my principle. I knew what I was watching was wrong, but I was too afraid to act. I was afraid for my own life, and I placed my own safety and comfort ahead of the safety of another human being, and also ahead of the principle of oneness that I said I believed in. It made a very big impression upon me, but I didn't suddenly become noble overnight as a result of it, and neither did my service to humankind become selfless quickly. Indeed, for a while I felt resentful towards people like Nelson Mandela who could give up everything for their principle, everything for what is right. But the experience stayed with me, and it would not let me go, and it would not let my conscience be, and it shaped me over time. And I'm better at it now because injustices I once turned a blind eye to, I'm less and less able to be quiet about. Now people like Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King Jr. and Mahatma Gandhi, they stand as a reminder for me to not let comfort and privilege corrupt my thinking brain or quiet my feeling heart. Now I am more inclined to not let the disapproval or disagreement of peers stop me from articulating unpopular points of view. I acknowledge I am still afraid. I still prefer personal comfort. But I'm learning every day from their examples to be a better human being. The journalist continues to say, Mandela didn't deny that he had planned sabotage. He said he had already determined that all lawful modes of expressing opposition to white supremacy had been closed by legislation. And we were, he said, placed in a position in which we had either to accept a permanent state of inferiority or to defy the government. And we chose to defy the government. You see, as the government closed more and more legal pathways to equality and made human rights, legal process, equal representation completely impossible to express or pursue, he did something very bold that I don't know that many people have the guts to do. He said no to an oppressive regime, to the government. And 30 years later, he was sworn in as president of that same country. The journalist says, the crowd at the time was large and joyful in Pretoria that day in May, when suddenly military planes roared overhead, and for a moment some of us thought that a coup was at hand. But instead it was an airborne salute marking a peaceful transition from white minority rule to democracy. South Africa was no longer an outlaw, Mandela said. Humanity has taken us back into its bosom. It's appropriate that we pay tribute to such great leaders. And so I have brought with me some of the timeless words from Mandela, which serve actually to remind us of the content and direction of our own faith tradition. They will seem to you very familiar. On the first slide, he reminds us, for to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. Our own founder, Ernest Holmes, spoke to that in his own words, saying, "It is not enough that I profess to love people. I must really love people more dearly than I ever have loved, because all people are my family." And there is so many opportunities, a multitude of opportunities in our world, in our own county, to put that into practice. Oh, the problem of homelessness in Sonoma County. Or further afield, in Russia, the criminalization of homosexuality. Or any of the works of any one of our 12 nonprofit organizations called to us to participate. In the second slide, he reminds us, I am fundamentally an optimist. Whether that comes from nature or nurture, I cannot say. Part of being optimistic is keeping one's head pointed towards the sun and one's feet moving forward. Oh, there were many dark moments when my faith in humanity was sorely tested, but I would not and could not give myself up to despair. That way lays defeat and death. Our own founder spoke to this with his own words, saying to us, Stay with the one and never deviate from it. Never leave it for a moment. Nothing else can equal that attitude. For to desert the truth in the hour of need is to prove that we never knew the truth in the first place. When things look the worst, he wrote, that is the supreme moment to demonstrate what you know. When things look the worst, it is the best time to practice. On the third slide, he reminds us that no one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. I have a friend who is very dear to me, and we agree on just about everything in the world, except for one fundamental difference. He believes that we are born fundamentally broken in sin, whereas I believe with our founder and with Nelson Mandela that we are born intact and that we begin to learn how to hate. And so it is that our founder says the divine plan is not one of freedom. Bondage is not God ordained. Our task, after being born intact, is to relearn the innocence of our true nature and to learn to love. On the fourth slide, Nelson Mandela reminds us, I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave person is not one who does not feel afraid, but one who conquers that fear. Well, that gave me courage to know that it's okay to be afraid, as long as I don't let it stop my voice or my action. To feel the fear and to proceed anyway. And I remember our founder writing about fear, saying, it is no good for a student of this faith tradition to have a mind filled up with fear, that we are to nurture within us poise and spiritual understanding to move into the world to do the work that we are to do. And on the fifth slide from Nelson Mandela, he says, overcoming poverty is not a task of charity. It is an act of justice. Like slavery and apartheid, poverty is not natural. It is human-made, and it can be overcome and eradicated by the actions of human beings. Sometimes it falls on a generation to be great. You can be that great generation. Let your greatness blossom. It's a big idea. It's a huge idea. He's saying that if people are hungry or poor, it's not God ordained. It's unjust. It's an unjust action of human collaboration. Wow. So what I'm taking with me from these 5 slides today are among the things that Nelson Mandela brought into this world. For today, I'm going to be dwelling on the next slide on these ideas. Number 1, to remember to respect everyone's freedom, not just those who agree with me. Secondly, to remember to be optimistic. And thirdly, to remember that love is natural to the human condition and to never accept any teaching that will try to distract me from that. Number 4, to remember to not let my fear stop me. It will be there. And finally, to remember that what has been made by humans or by thought can be unmade by humans or by thought. I invite you to take a breath in with me and exhale, letting your eyes close, to take a moment with me to contemplate the contribution of Nelson Mandela or other great leaders who have contributed to the upliftment of the human condition. A great stillness steals over me, and a great calm quiets my whole being as I realize the presence of Spirit within me. In God's presence, I am still. And so it is.